News is something that someone wants suppressed. Everything else is just advertising. British newspaper publisher Aldred Harmsworth, a.k.a. Lord Northcliffe.
I remember being in my grandmother's kitchen. She had a radio there, and it had the familiar AM stations on it. But then there was another button you could push for SW, shortwave. And I heard,
"This is the Voice of America, Washington, D.C., signing on."
That's not next door to Cincinnati. Even then I could tell it was something that was projecting the United States to the rest of the world.
Steve Herman had an idea that broadcasting somehow existed in his future. He started early and settled into a decades-long career with the Voice of America, or VOA, a job that took him all over the world and eventually to the White House. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful. Stories.
I'm a native Buckeye, Ohio, Cincinnati, but at the age of 12, my family moved out to Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas was much, much smaller than it is now, and it had no major league sports teams. So that was definitely a disincentive for me. When I was little, I pretended that I was directing TV programs, making fake studio cameras out of cardboard boxes. So I did have a fascination with media in general, specifically television and radio, from a very early age. Even into middle school, I started to have an attraction towards perhaps being a Major League Baseball announcer. Vin Scully was a Dodgers announcer. Red Barber was a legendary announcer on the East Coast. Any professional baseball announcer, I was definitely listening to and picking up pointers from them. And sadly, I never ended up as a sports announcer, which is a lot of the students I deal with now. That's their main thing. They're more interested in sports than news, and I really can't blame them with how dire a lot of the stuff is in the news these days. In the 7th grade, when I went into the 7th grade, I started out as the sports editor of the school newspaper. And then I believe in high school, I was the features editor. I really didn't get into hard news until I started working part-time in radio stations in the Las Vegas area. And at first I thought, hey, being a DJ is fun, but you were playing the same records every hour, so it got a little bit boring. But the news was different every single day. The news did not repeat. And so I found that to be really fascinating. There was a body a day found in the desert outside of town. This was the waning years of the mob, which was losing influence, and corporates were taking over the casino industry. And Las Vegas had conventions. So everybody from the president of the United States on down came to Las Vegas to speak or attend some convention at some point. Not only was I working in the local stations doing news, I was sending reports to the networks. And I thought that was pretty cool. Here I was, a teenager, and my voice was ending up on national radio newscasts. And I was lucky early on in my career to have some really good mentors who let me go out in the field and cover stories and had a light hand in guidance. But, willing to take risks, going on the air live without a script, from the scene of a homicide or a fire or a plane crash, things like that. So I was very fortunate to get a lot of experience early on significant stories. Over a period of time, I found for the type of journalism that I wanted to do, the Voice of America fit me the best. I was encouraged to apply, and I did, and was offered a position as the bureau chief in New Delhi, India. And when I took the job, I then realized that I was in the Foreign Service.
The Voice of America, VOA, established in 1942, is a U.S. government-funded international broadcaster that provides news and information in more than 40 languages to global audiences. Its mission is to promote freedom and democracy by delivering accurate and objective journalism to people living in regions where a free press is restricted or unavailable.
I just really liked the type of journalism that Voice of America was doing, and I really believed in the mission that our audience was not the United States. It was the rest of the world, especially developing countries that didn't have a sophisticated media infrastructure, and countries that were under authoritarian governments where their reporters were not allowed to be objective. And so the Voice of America was actually a voice for them as well.
I want to step back and have you walk me through a little bit the creation of Voice of America and also how the concept of soft power kind of fit into that from that time.
The Voice of America was created in the early days of World War II, and it was really unique. You had these other international broadcasters out there from Germany, from Japan, but they were just overt propaganda. And the Voice of America, which was initially under the Office of War Information, came on the air in German first, before English or any other language.
Hier spricht eine Stimme aus Amerika im Krieg. Unsere Stimmen kommen.
And said, whether the news is good or bad,
We shall tell you the truth.
and that was a pretty radical concept at the time for a government-funded international broadcaster, especially in wartime, because the thought was you use these powerful tools of soft power. That term had not been invented yet, but that's what it was, as propaganda, not as an objective type of media. So it was pretty radical when it went on the air. After World War II, so we won. Hey, great. A lot of people in Congress especially thought, well, we don't need to fund this anymore, and the government shouldn't be in the broadcasting business. There was a lot of discomfort about that. But other people pointed out, we now have a Cold War, and we need to rebut what the Soviet Union is saying on the airwaves. And why not use the Voice of America?
Wherever you may be listening to this broadcast, remember this. The people of the United States extend the hand of friendship to you across the seas.
So a compromise was reached that would ensure legally that the Voice of America would not target Americans, and it would not beam into the United States. It would purely be an external service. And I remember as a kid writing to the Voice of America because they had a contest on the air. You could, I don't know, get a calendar or something like that. And they wrote me a typewritten letter back, very formal, telling me that they regretted that they couldn't, I wasn't eligible for this contest or whatever it was because I was an American.
Edward R. Murrow said, warts and all, we'll present ourselves warts and all. You just said, whether it's good news or bad news, we'll tell the truth. I know as a former diplomat the power of authenticity, and I know how much it means to people when they realize that America is not projecting itself as a perfect place. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how VOA made an impact with foreign audiences. And were there early successes or kind of powerful examples of impact in those early years?
Talk to the leaders of all of those democracy movements in Eastern Europe over the decades. Havel and Walesa will tell you the Voice of America made a difference. It gave them hope. To some degree, I think it also helped them form their concepts about what is democracy.
Time for jazz. Willis Conover in Washington, D.C. with the voice.
You are about
of
to hear some jazz recordings never before broadcast. Jazz by Hungarians, recorded a few weeks ago, just before the freedom
Not
fight.
everything was just newscasts that were on the Voice of America. Probably the single greatest program was a jazz show. Jazz was considered a subversive type of music on the other side of the Berlin Wall. And Willis Conover was the host of this program. And he probably, except for perhaps the President of the United States, was the most famous American in many countries throughout the world for many years. And he had all the jazz greats on his program, like Dizzy Gillespie. That program is probably as responsible for bringing down the Berlin Wall as any other element of public diplomacy. Tanks, American tanks, did not bust through the Berlin Wall. It was jazz wafting over the Berlin Wall. You know, we have this tsunami of all sorts of information coming into us these days, and that's true in most countries. But back then, there was no television in a lot of these countries at the time. The domestic radio stations or newspapers were dry, boring. There was very little true entertainment that people had access to. And in the more repressive countries, even the government was using entertainment as another form of propaganda, and everybody knew it. So the Voice of America and jazz music coming across at night was something really extraordinary and very compelling. And the fact that some countries, such as the Soviet Union, were trying to block it by using powerful transmitters, just sending out noise. It's called jamming. In some countries, it was illegal. So it was also a kind of a forbidden fruit. You could access this just with a radio. I think in some ways, just the act of listening to the Voice of America was an act of defiance that people wanted to do. They couldn't go out in the streets and demonstrate, but they could listen to VOA.
Was it dangerous for people to listen to VOA?
Well, I think an example in recent years was North Korea, where we know that people who were caught listening to the Voice of America, or even were ratted out, even sometimes by family members, were sent off to prison camps. That's a testament to how much these regimes feared these broadcasts. I was a very rare American journalist. I was permitted by the North Koreans to do reporting from North Korea over a 10-day period. It was an extraordinary trip. I tell people, Chris, I've been to 75 countries and there's only one I do not care to go back to, and that's North Korea, because I was aware that so many things could go wrong. And even though I was with the Voice of America, I was in some potential danger. What I realized inside North Korea, yes, they have this all-powerful absolute leader, a member of the Kim family at any point in time. But below that, there were rivalries between the secret police, the foreign ministry, the military. And just because I was being escorted around by one entity did not necessarily protect me from some potential trouble with another agency. And one thing I learned in North Korea from talking to these members of an elite unit of the KPA, the Korean People's Army, was that they listened to the voice of America. They acknowledged that. Now, they were certain I was with the CIA because I knew how to use chopsticks and I liked drinking makgeolli. And, I spoke a little bit of Korean, so of course I had to be with the CIA.
The chopsticks are
But they also told me that they knew that CNN, that all of its programming was being vetted or dictated by the CIA as well. We know from defectors from North Korea that people did listen to it, and some of them, kind of light bulb went off in their heads. At first, they were skeptical of what was on the Voice of America, but then when they heard stuff about their own country coming on VOA and could look around and confirm with their own eyes that VOA was telling the truth and their own government was not, that was a light bulb moment for them.
I've talked to people who have snuck over the border into North Korea, but I've never talked to anyone who spent any amount of time there and was actually acknowledged by the North Koreans. What was your biggest surprise when you were there?
Well, we were very fortunate because of some changing circumstances. We were not on the typical tourist dog and pony show. We got out to see the countryside, and we could see evidence of poverty in the countryside, and corn being grown up right against the railroad tracks. Every available space was being used to grow food, and people in soiled or tattered clothing, and people out on the roadside that appeared to be selling food as well, little elements of capitalism, so to speak. I mean, that was something that a lot of people don't get to see from outside the country. Most presidents during their term in office spoke on the Voice of America or gave the VOA an exclusive interview or even came to the Voice of America. Well, I think almost all of them, going back at least to Eisenhower, really valued what VOA was doing and made public statements to that effect. Kennedy thought that the Voice of America was so important that he appointed someone you mentioned earlier, Edward R. Murrow, to head the U.S. Information Agency, probably the most prominent journalist in the United States at that time. I always saw, and in my research about the history of VOA, found that all these administrations were supportive. Now, in the Reagan administration, there was an overseer, a fellow named Charles Z. Wick, who did want to have the VOA take a much tougher stance towards the Soviet Union. I think if he had been let loose and there weren't the legal restraints, he may have wanted to turn the VOA into the voice of Reagan. But there were these legal constraints on that.
Can you take us into the White House and walk us through your time as a correspondent there?
I covered the entirety of the first Trump administration and the first year of the Biden administration. The Voice of America was an integral part of the White House press corps. I did more than 100 flights on Air Force One as a pool reporter, was in the Oval Office countless times and interacting with the presidents, asking them direct questions. And the fact that I was from the Voice of America didn't make any difference. They treated us just as they would treat any other reporter. We had a seat in the press briefing room in the fourth row. You want to be in the first row if you can, but that's for the big wire services and the big TV networks. And we were regularly called on to ask questions of the press secretary on a daily basis. We were not any different than the other reporters there, even though our paychecks were coming from the United States government. So it was very unique in that regard.
Do you remember the most uncomfortable question that you ever asked?
I think there was an impromptu moment where there was a briefing in the East Room. Joe Biden was taking questions, and this was after the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. I had a particular question about that, and I was pressing him a little bit and trying to get him to acknowledge that mistakes were made, and I could tell he was a bit irritated with it. But I was doing my job just like any other reporter, and Voice of America especially, we're broadcasting to all these other countries in dozens of languages. So we were more interested in the granular details of what may be happening in Somalia, Afghanistan, or the Korean Peninsula compared to your typical White House reporter who usually was focused on the scandal du jour or looking for that gotcha question that would make a nice soundbite on TV that night. So our approach was a little bit different. On big issues, such as things that were happening in Afghanistan, we expected that the president would be up to speed, and those sort of questions were fair game. You get a limited amount of questions, and with most presidents, you really don't get follow-ups. And, there was a little bit of that sometimes, the back and forth.
I always think of the guy from India. I can't remember his name.
Goyal the Foil. Yeah, he's in my book. I talk about the number of eccentrics that have been part of the White House press corps over the decades. So yeah, he was never part of the press pool, but he would be able to attend the daily briefings and stand to the side because he didn't have an assigned seat. And he was used over particular administrations, say, there was an intense series of questions trying to wear down the press secretary on a contentious domestic issues. And then the press secretary would point his finger and call on Goyal, who would want to ask about, mango imports or something like that.
That's hilarious.
Another overriding factor with being a reporter for the Voice of America, you were not expected to be first. You were expected to be correct. Accuracy was far more important than speed. And that could be frustrating at times as a journalist, because I did sometimes have what you can call them scoops or exclusives. And sometimes by the time the story got issued, the AP or somebody had picked up on it, or the New York Times. And so that would really frustrate me. But I understood that we had these double sourcing methodology, and reports sometimes would go through 3 editors. So for people to allege that VOA was biased or had a particular political agenda, that was absolutely ridiculous. I would always tell people who would say these sort of things, you can access everything in English that the VOA puts out on the website. Go look at my stories. Go look at the stories of my colleagues, and then come back to me and show me where the bias is. On any particular issue, we would be balanced. If we were going to have someone who was in favor of allowing abortion, for example, we would also have someone explaining why they thought abortion should be banned. So depending on which political party is in power, they may not like a balanced view being presented. But the Voice of America, in its charter, is compelled to reflect American thought and institution. If there's a big debate going on in the United States about some issue, we are compelled to report what's going on with that issue and not just parrot whatever the government, the administration that happens to be in power would like to be the messaging for that particular issue.
And did you ever feel as if the VOA was being blocked or being kind of restricted from reporting on anything regarding the U.S.?
No, not until Donald Trump was elected the second time. And even before the political appointees came in, upper management started to soften headlines and leads of stories. We noted this and complained internally about it, saying that this was a kind of anticipatory obedience. And we warned them that this isn't going to work. That's going to become the new starting point. But I think the theory was if we throw out some fresh meat to the wolves, it'll keep them at bay from entering the cave. That's not what happened. And of course, within a couple of weeks, VOA was silenced.
What does the world look like without VOA? What are the implications of not having this thing that we've had for decades reliably?
What the world looks like now without the Voice of America is a much poorer information diet for hundreds of millions of people around the world, many of whom relied on the Voice of America beyond any other media entity, domestic or international, not only to find out what was happening in the world, but what was happening in their own country. Information is vital. A lack of information is dangerous because, as you well know from being a diplomat, in the countryside or even in the cities, if rumors start to spread and there's false information being disseminated for nefarious purposes, people might turn on each other. Or if you're not getting accurate information, say about an outbreak of a disease in parts of Africa, and people don't understand the symptoms or don't seek proper treatment, these diseases can spread into epidemics and pandemics, and then it endangers everybody in the world. I mean, COVID was a perfect example of that. You know, we always would do a lot of stories when there were Ebola outbreaks. I remember a case where I was a bureau chief in South Asia based in New Delhi, and we put out some information about a cyclone heading to Bangladesh. We potentially saved lives because there was no domestic information coming out about the path of this very dangerous storm. What better examples can you have than having the power to save lives through these television and radio broadcasts?
As of this recording, the VOA is undergoing a major operational crisis, with around 85% of its workforce laid off since March 2025, and its parent agency facing legal and financial challenges that threaten its viability. We're coming to the end of the show, but Aunt Deb has a question for Steve.
Why should my hard-earned tax dollars help pay for free programming outside of the U.S.?
I would tell my aunt or any other relative or person, as I have for many years, that these elements of soft power, like the Voice of America, are probably the best bang for your buck as a taxpayer. A fighter jet can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. For the price of a couple of fighter jets, we are projecting soft power. And what that means is they get a real view of what the United States is like, which counters the propaganda that's coming out of their own country. We demonstrate that the United States is a multicultural society, and maybe that kid is also being influenced, for example, by jihadist elements in his society. So we give them a taste of what democracy and America is like. And we know from the many decades of programming from the Voice of America that people had an affinity for the United States. We want to be able to spend our money to get goodwill in the rest of the world through these government-funded broadcasts, which are a minuscule part of the government budget. And if you want to look at it from a sort of selfish standpoint, maybe it helps prevent a terrorist attack. Maybe it helps prevent a pandemic from spreading and affecting us. I'm sure as you saw as a diplomat, these exchange programs that the United States does, these people go back and become leaders in their society. And that's the same thing with the Voice of America, as I pointed out, with the leaders of the democracy movements in Eastern Europe. Credit goes to VOA for helping to sustain and bring morale to these leaders and their followers, and created a better world for us. Look at all the money we don't have to spend to be in this arms race like we were in the Cold War era. That money is money that can be better spent on more positive things. And we didn't end up in a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union or China. Maybe VOA played a part in that as well.
Stephen Herman was the Voice of America's White House bureau chief and chief national correspondent. He is currently the executive director of the Jordan Center for Journalism Advocacy and Innovation and an assistant professor of practice at the University of Mississippi. Herman spent more than a quarter century in Asia, mostly as a VOA bureau chief. His travels have taken him to approximately 75 countries, which included on-scene reporting of wars, revolutions, demonstrations, elections, and global leaders' summits, as well as natural and nuclear disasters. Herman is the former president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan and the Seoul Foreign Correspondents Club. He previously served on the governing boards of the American Foreign Service Association and the Overseas Press Club of America. He is currently completing a one-year term on the board of the National Press Club. Herman has been a jurist journalist in residence at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, a journalism fellow at the Law School of Loyola Marymount University, and a Kiplinger Fellow at Ohio University. He holds an MA in liberal arts with an emphasis on public diplomacy from Mountain State University. His book is called Behind the White House Curtain, a senior journalist's story of covering the president and why it matters. To learn more about Steve's current activities, go to steveherman.press. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. If you haven't followed us already wherever you get your podcasts, please do so. Please leave a rating. It means a lot to us. And not only that, but it helps get those algorithms moving this show to the ears that need to hear it, or that we would like to hear it. You can find out much more by visiting our website at softpowerfulstories.org. There you can learn more about our guests, see pictures of them in action, find out the music that we use, and, of course, leave feedback. We would love to hear from you. Our show's logo was designed by Kate Furby, and my friend Kathy Zilski voices Dubious Aunt Deb, who, of course, she is nothing like, but she does it perfect. My name is Christopher Wurst. I'm the host and producer of Soft Powerful Stories. Until next time.